مرة بعمل هالشي بحياتي. معلش ما رح أكون نيرفس لأنه ديون بصور قصص بلا طعمة على الانستا، فما في فرق، بس فرق رح يكون الثيم كتير intellectual. قررت أعمل هذا الشيء بطريقة كتير spontaneous. قررت إنه ما رح أفكر بقى twice، رح بلش خلص يعني رح كب حالي بالموضوع، وحتى لو بس شخصين عم بيحضروا رح كون devoted لإلهم رح كون devoted لهذا المشروع لأنه بيعني لي بكل صراحة. بالي كنت أعمل بروجكت يكون بعيد عن الشغل، بعيد عن شيء بعيشه كل يوم والتعب تبع الشغل، شيء يكون committed لإله وبيعطيني حتى motivation. يعني حتى لو أنا عم جرب أشتغل على حالي إنه أقرأ أكتر وأكتر، إذا عندي هيدا البروجكت اللي عم بعمله اللي هو إنه أعمل بودكاست عن الموضوع، هذا الشيء رح يخليني أكون ديسيبلين. أنا كتير بحب الليتراتور وكانت جزء من حياتي عن جد من أنا وصغيرة. ما كنت إنه أقرأ كتب كتير إنه كبيرة علي أو إنه أقرأ نوفلز، يا ريت كنت من هالنوع الكيدز، بس كنت حابة بيكتشر بوكس. حتى بيكتشر بوكس كانوا جزء كبير من حياتي لأنه أنا بحب الرسم، فأنا كبرت مع الكتب، مع القصص الماجيكال والفيري تيلز والرسم. هلأ في شغلة unfortunately أنا رح اضطر سويتش من العربي للإنجليش لسبب واحد، إنه أنا في عندي أصحاب ما بيحكوا عربي و they were nice enough إنه يعملوا فولو للبيج تبع هيدا البودكاست اللي بلشته. احتراما لألون لازم أحكي بلغة يفهموها، وقال لا إنه رح يكونوا supportive، بس إنه عم بيحضروا شيء ما عم بيفهموا شيء علي. رح أعمل سويتش، بس I'm so sorry عن جد. أنا ما بحب كون كرينجي إنه أحكي إنجليش، بس مضطرة ترجع عيدا بالإنجليش. I'm gonna have to switch to English because I think it's the least I can do for my friends who followed this page in support of me. So thank you, and this is why I'm gonna speak English. I'm so sorry, I'm not fluent and my pronunciation is cringy, but bear with me if you can. So we start at the beginning. First I want to say that the first book I picked to talk about is a bit strange. It's a bit intense and I'm so sorry about that, but it just so happens to be one of the last 2 books that I read. It's related to a topic that interests me personally. I'm sorry if it's not your cup of tea, but the genre is true crime. It's based on a real story, real events. If you're into true crime, you might enjoy this. Maybe you're gonna learn something new. I don't know. First, I'm gonna talk about my relationship with true crime because I've been thinking about it since yesterday. I don't remember how I got into this obsession of mine with true crime. Because to be honest with you, as a child and as a teenager, I was a very fragile person. I remember I would avoid listening to any story related to people doing horrible things to other people because human nature terrifies me in many ways. And as a kid, whenever I would hear something, it affects me so deeply. I would always imagine whatever it is that I'm hearing happening to me. And I would think to myself, like, what if I was this person? What if I was this girl? What if I was murdered this way? Like, I would take it personally, it would mess me up. And I grew up this way, and it wasn't easy, by the way. It was never easy because I was always, not always, but I was usually scared of strangers. I would be terrified of a situation where I would find myself alone with a stranger. I remember when I graduated from high school and it was time for me to go to uni, I was terrified. I was faced with the reality of having to take public transportation to go to university, and I was very reluctant. When I say I was reluctant, I mean it. For the first 2 years, I forced my father to drive me from home to uni and from uni back home because it was inconceivable for me to get on a bus or a taxi alone with a man. So yeah, I was very, very dramatic. I overdid it a bit. I know that I was overly dramatic, but I don't know why I was built this way. Things changed a lot because after I graduated from university in Lebanon, I had to go to step 2, which was doing my master's, and I did it alone in a foreign country, and I lived there for 7 years, and then I graduated from university, and then I had to travel again and live alone here in Jeddah. So I had to be faced with this reality of living alone. I don't drive, I don't have a car, so I've been taking public transportation and Ubers for years now. So I had to deal with my fear, and it was fine. But as a kid who used to be horrified by, strangers and stories about crime, I grew up pretty obsessed with true crime. I don't know how it happened, but it's literally what I spend most of my time doing research on or listening to or watching. And oddly enough, And ironically enough, the first book I'm going to talk about is related to true crime. And it's about one of the most infamous serial killers in America. And it is the BTK killer. Unfortunately, I couldn't find this one anywhere, not even on Amazon. So I had to read it in PDF format. I had to read it as an ebook. So I'm going to upload the image here or here. The book is called Confessions of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer. And it's by Catherine Ramsland, PhD. It's one of those books that are worth talking about extensively because there's a lot of back information related to it. First, I'm going to start talking about the BTK killer himself. You might be wondering, what do you mean by BTK? Why is he called BTK? BTK was a moniker that he created for himself, actually. B is bind them, T is torture them, and then K is kill them. The real name of the BTK killer is Dennis Rader. He's still alive, by the way. He's still incarcerated in El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. What they know until now is that he killed 10 people. He admitted to those, but they're still unsure if there are more. He committed all those crimes in Wichita, Kansas between 1974 and 1991. He was caught in 2004. He got away with murder for 30 years. I'm gonna tell you why Dennis Rader is a very interesting person. First of all, you need to understand that serial killers are not all the same type of people. And it's something that the author of the book herself explains extensively. Serial killers, they don't fit inside one mold. You cannot say that there are specific characteristics or personality traits that make a serial killer what they are. They are all different. They can have things in common, but there's no recipe, as they say. So there's something called the McDonald triad. And it's where they say that usually people who, as kids, torture animals, wet their beds, and set things on fire, then they're definitely a serial killer. It doesn't apply. Some serial killers never did any of those three as kids. So it's not a fact. It's not a fact. It can apply. Some people fit this mold, but it doesn't always apply. So Catherine Ramsland, the way she defines serial killers is very simple, actually. She always says that a serial killer is a person who has killed 2 or more people on different occasions. This is the only definition that she gives about serial killers. They all have different fetishes, they all have different motivations, they all have different approaches in the way they do things. Now, you will find this very strange if I tell you that some of them get inspiration from others. And BTK was one of those. Even in the book, he mentions some of the serial killers that he would read about and he would admire them. He wanted to be like them. So sometimes they get inspiration from each other, which is very messed up. I think he had admiration for Ted Bundy. Another serial killer that Dennis Rader admired was a guy called Harvey Glattman. He used to pretend like he was a photographer and he would lure women into his apartment or seduce them to go to the California desert, and he would pretend like he was going to do a photo shoot for a magazine, and then he would tie them up, and then he would take pictures of them looking helpless because that gave him pleasure, and then he would end their lives. So that was one of the guys that Dennis Rader admired, and he wanted to emulate him in a way. Now, very briefly, I'm going to explain to you what forensic psychology is. Forensic psychology applies psychological principles and scientific knowledge to law and legal systems, bridging the gap between psychology and criminal justice. So forensic psychologists address questions in criminal and family cases, and they are also able to provide assessment and treatment to let's say criminals. They are some of the most important people who aid in courts and correctional facilities or prisons, let's say. So Catherine Ramsland, she is one of the most respected ones in the field, and she is said to be the foremost authority when it comes to the BTK case. And she admits herself that she became friends with BTK. They did a lot of correspondence throughout the years, him in prison and her visiting him, or they would exchange letters. They even played chess via letters. I don't know if I can say that this book is a biography or an autobiography. I think it's in between two, because BTK has a voice in the book. She quotes him a lot in the book. So in a way, they worked on the book together. Okay, so what I find very fascinating about Dennis Rader, or the BTK killer, is that he lived 2 very different and separate lives, and he succeeded at it. for a very long time. In his normal life, he was a seemingly normal individual. He was a normal citizen. He was a very respectable man. He had a family. He had his wife. He had 2 kids. He was a US Air Force veteran. He was a Boy Scout leader. And on top of that, he was the president of his church congregation. But, and we discovered that through the book, the secret parts of his personality, he explains them in his own words, and sometimes Catherine Ramsland, she explains them further. Apparently, as a kid, and specifically when he became a teenager, Dennis Rader was obsessed with bondaging, and this is related to BDSM. He felt pleasure with everything related to ropes and being tied up and tying someone up. But as a kid or as a teenager, and before he started committing his crimes, he would do these things on himself, on his own body. He would do self-bondaging. And that helped him with self-gratification, to reach pleasure. In his mind, he had this obsession with wanting to dominate women or wanting to dominate the other. Before committing his first crime, as I said, he would do these things on his own self, or he would fantasize about them. The fantasy has always been a very big part of his life. And he would also wear women's underwear because ever since he was a kid, he was obsessed with the silkiness of women's underwear. So he would wear them, he would bondage himself. He would also bury himself in the sand. He would do all these kinds of self-torture because it gave him pleasure. I remember there's a moment that he describes in the book where, as a kid, he used to sleep next to his grandma or next to his mom. So they would use these silky ribbons to tie their braids. So as a kid, he used to touch these silky ribbons and put them in between his lips. Like, he had a thing for silk, soft, silky stuff or women-related objects ever since he was a kid. One day, Dennis Rader, he got fired from his job, and he got very bored, and he got very depressed, and he got angry. So what he started doing was stalking women. He would stalk them, he would learn about their routine, see who they lived with, what part of the day they would be alone so he can break in, go through their stuff and steal stuff. He was very strange. After having stalked his first victim, Julia Otero, he decided to finally break in, but he didn't expect to find her husband and 2 of their children. So consequently, he had to end all their lives. All he wanted to do actually was to assert his dominance on Julia Otero, but because he was faced by the entire family, he freaked out. He didn't want anyone to know about him. That was his first crime, and then more crimes followed. And another intriguing thing about Dennis Rader is that he wanted to be famous. Instead of laying low, he wanted attention. He would literally play with the police. He would send them cryptic letters and poems and puzzles, and even letters detailing his crimes. I remember there was a story where he had arrested people thinking that they were the ones responsible for a crime that he did, and he got offended. So he sent a letter to the police saying that those 2 people that you have in custody, they did not do it. I was the one who did it, and I can give you proof. So he started detailing the crime. And I remember there was this story where he got upset because people weren't talking about him enough. So he would send letters to news stations. He would tell them, how many crimes would I have to commit before you mention my name? He wanted to be famous. And then at some point he stopped communicating with the police, and then the case went cold. By 2004, news reports were speculating that BTK was either dead or in prison. So he resumed communication with them because he needed the attention, and that led him to be caught eventually. In 2005, Dennis Rader sent to the police a floppy disk, and through it they were able to trace metadata to the computer in the church where he used to work. So the police identified him as a primary suspect. And then they obtained a warrant. They were able to test his daughter's DNA from a medical sample, and they found a match from a sample that they had from one of his crimes. Dennis Rader pled guilty on all counts in court, and he was sentenced to a life without the possibility of parole. He was lucky because at the time of his conviction, Kansas didn't have the death penalty. That was briefly the story of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, and I think this book by Catherine Ramsland, I think it was the best because she literally did it with the person. All the facts are true, and there are a lot of interesting details. So if you're interested in true crime, and if you're interested to know more about infamous serial killers like BTK, I would really recommend this book. It was a good one. Now, to recap, the most interesting things that I've learned through this book and through the research that followed me reading the book was me learning that serial killers, they don't fit the same mold, that we should not think that they're all the same person, or they all react the same way, they all have the same motives, they all have the same dramatic childhood. Sometimes it's unrelated. It's also interesting to see how in certain cases, like in the case of BTK, even though he was a serial killer, but he tried as hard as he can to fight his impulses. And he kind of had remorse. I know it's very messed up to say, but he didn't want to do what he did. He tried to fight it. He tried to find other ways to satisfy his impulses. It didn't work, but he did try for a long time. He literally used to have these things that he called motel parties, where he would book a room in a motel, and he would do whatever he wanted to do with himself, and then he would leave and go back to his family. So he did try to fight it off. He did try to avoid harming other people. But once he tried it, once he took it out on another human being, it became very intoxicating to him, and he couldn't stop. And probably the most interesting thing to me about Dennis Rader is that he's very conscious about everything that he did. It wasn't like he had a split personality. It wasn't like he would do all these horrible things and he wasn't aware of them. He was very aware of what he did, to the point where he would analyze his own personality, and he came up with a word. He literally coined a word that is used in psychology. The term is cubing. Psychologists, they usually use the term compartmentalizing, which is derived from the word compartment, where you have different compartments, and in each one of those you have a different personality or a different aspect of your personality. But Dennis Rader, he refers to this phenomenon as cubing. So let's say you have a cube. You have on this side an aspect of your personality, and on another side you have a completely different personality. Both sides exist in one cube, but you switch sides whenever you want, and you are aware of all sides. He's a very interesting, he's a very unhinged person. He's very honest about himself. He opens up about a lot of things, and I think it was very good of him to do that, because him opening up and explaining a lot of aspects of his personality and all his fantasies and how he did things and why he did them, it helps a lot. It helped forensic psychologists to learn more about these very complex human conditions. After discovering his secrets, his family was very, very damaged. Of course, his wife left him. She literally disappeared. She never talks about it. No one knows anything about her, even his son. But I have a lot of respect for his daughter. His daughter, Carrie Ralston. She's very outspoken. She was very damaged for a very long time. But then therapy helped. And she always says that talking helps a lot. She's always very honest in talking about her dad and how she tries to separate the dad that she knew and BTK that she discovered later on. She also wrote a book, A Serial Killer's Daughter, My Story of Hope, Love, and Overcoming. They also recently released a Netflix documentary about his daughter. It's called My Father, the BTK Killer. And it was also a very good documentary if you want to check it out. I have this notebook here. It's a notebook that my student gave me when she graduated. She designed it. I love this book so much. I always use it to write down my favorite quotes from the books that I'm reading. So I had this idea to end each episode with a quote that I picked up from the book. This quote is by Dennis Rader himself. He says, "You don't understand these things because you're not under the influence of Factor X, the same thing that made Son of Sam, Jack the Ripper, Harvey Glatman, Boston Strangler, Dr. H.H. Holmes, Pantyhose Strangler, Hillside Strangler, Ted of the West Coast, and many more infamous characters killed. There is no help, no cure, except death or being caught and put away." This quote makes me very sad. I think how some people know that they have something in them that cannot be fixed, or that is so out of control that it just needs to be put away. Like, you need to be away from other human beings, and he was so aware of that. It's still a mystery, like what made him become the way he was, what made him become controlled by what he calls the Factor X that not everyone has. So yeah, that was my first podcast about a very intense book and a very intense topic. Next time is also going to be about the true crime genre. But I'm also excited about it because it's about Ted Bundy, and he is also yet another infamous serial killer, and it's someone who I have been obsessing over for a very long time now, and my research is still ongoing. I'm gonna talk about 2 books next time. One that I finished recently, and it's The Phantom Prince, and it's written by Elizabeth Candle. This book is about the woman who was Ted Bundy's partner for 4 years. The other book is The Stranger Beside Me, written by Anne Rule, and it's the person who was his friend and a person who worked alongside him for years as well. 2 different points of view, both very interesting and informative. And that's it for now. If you watched the video all the way through, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and see you next time.